Joining us now on our Book Talk segment, great to welcome a woman who's written a very interesting book about a very little-known thing that happened during World War II, and that's why it's called The Great Secret, the classified World War II disaster that launched the war on cancer. We're joined today by Jennet Conant, and I believe she's up in New York today, Long Island, right, Jennet?
I am. I'm in Sag Harbor.
Great. You're talking to a former Long Islander, grew up in Floral Park, so always good to talk to somebody from Long Island. Well, congratulations on the book. I had a chance to read through it, and again, I guess like most people, probably why you wrote the book, did not know anything about this story. First of all, how did you get involved in finding out about this?
I was going through my grandfather's papers, and my grandfather was James P. Conant. He was one of the directors of the Manhattan Project.
Oh, sure.
That developed the bomb, but he was also in charge of all chemical weapons, which most of us think were not used in World War II. But surprisingly, I discovered that we made a huge amount of poison gas in World War II, and we shipped it to Europe. We didn't want to use it, but we were so afraid that the Germans would use it that we made it and we shipped it to Europe, and we had it in these secret reserves just in case.
You talk about the Manhattan Project. We had some former in-laws that the father of that person worked on the Manhattan Project as well. So there's a lot of things that went on, obviously, that nobody knew about, but now, little by little, I guess we're hearing more about it, right? What was going on during World War II? Yeah. People hear the term, and you talk about it in the book, mustard gas, right? Is that pretty much what it was?
Yes. In this case, it was mustard gas, and what happened is that on the night of December 2nd, 1943, the Germans bombed a huge Allied port in Bari, Italy,
right.
And we were bringing in tons of munitions, tanks, jeeps, bombs of every kind, getting ready for D-Day and the big push into Europe. And we were caught by surprise, and the Nazi bombing raid exploded and sunk 17 ships and killed over 1,000 young American, British, and British sailors, and wounded another 1,000. But it was so terrible that event was called the Little Pearl Harbor. It was the worst naval tragedy of the war. But that was really all that they ever released about that humiliating event, because aside from the tragedy of the deaths and the sunken ships, what they did not reveal was that one of the bombed ships, the American Liberty ship, the John Harvey, was carrying a secret cargo of 2,000 mustard gas bombs.
Right.
And when they exploded, it released a huge cloud of poisonous mustard gas over the harbor, and it poisoned hundreds and hundreds of the sailors who survived the initial attack.
And we'll get into what came out of it that was beneficial. Unfortunately, not for those people, or a sad situation. But the secret was kept, of course, by both Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower at the time, right? That they kept it under wraps.
Yeah, they agreed to conceal the truth because they were terrified that if Hitler learned that the mustard gas was there, he would retaliate and launch a huge chemical war. So rather than risk that, they sort of, in some sense, sacrificed the hundreds of survivors that had already been exposed and might well sicken and die in any case. They had to weigh that against the hundreds of thousands of troops that were fighting for victory. They wanted to protect them from being, caught in a huge gas attack if the Germans learned of this incident. So the whole accident was classified. Nobody was to mention mustard gas. Even the term mustard gas was stricken from all the wartime communications, and it was taken out of all of the medical charts. That was how strict the wartime censorship was. As a result, the doctors who were treating these young men didn't really know what was wrong with them, and when they started dying suddenly of mysterious symptoms, they sent a red alert to headquarters, and Eisenhower sent a young chemical warfare expert, a young American doctor named Stuart Alexander, to investigate. And he was not told what he was investigating, so he walked into this huge disaster.
Now, mustard gas was used primarily during World War I, right?
That's correct.
Banned by the Geneva Convention after that because it was so brutal. Wasn't that what happened?
That's right. And World War I was it was largely a land war. So mustard gas in that case had been carried by the wind and choked and scorched the lungs of advancing troops and killed them. But what happened in this case was, because this was a naval disaster and the ship carrying the mustard gas sank, the mustard gas hadn't really, most of it wasn't released into the air. Only some of it was released into the air by the bombs that were exploded. The rest sank, and what happened is it leaked out into the water of the harbor, and it mixed with the fuel oil. And this had never happened before in history, and it produced an unprecedented event, which was the super poisonous combination of fuel oil and mustard gas. It was super toxic. So the sailors that jumped overboard and swam to safety or were rescued off of the burning ships, they were covered in this mixture. And, otherwise they were okay. They'd been rescued. So they ended up sitting in the hospital wards while, the severely burned and severely injured went into surgery. They sat around in their wet uniforms for 24 to 48 hours waiting to be seen by the doctors. And they ended up marinating in this toxic mixture, and it killed them. And it was very tragic.
And again, mustard gas is made out of mustard, and it's not technically a gas, right? I mean, it just creates a smell like it. It's a liquid. Yeah, right.
It's called mustard gas because it has it's a chemical, but it has a kind of a peppery smell, and the troops always said it smelled like mustard. And what happened was, when this young doctor arrived in the hospitals and he's walking through the wards and he's trying to figure out what's wrong with the men, he picked up this odor. It wasn't immediately obvious because the wards stunk of explosives and fuel oil and burnt flesh, but he among the odors, he thought he detected the smell of mustard gas. He was an expert, so he was trained in it. And the British kept insisting, no, you're wrong, there's no mustard gas here, are you kidding, that's a World War I weapon, you're mistaken. But he realized it was a cover-up, and he was determined to try and save as many of the men as he could. He insisted they treat them for mustard gas, even though the British refused to acknowledge it. And then he did this complete investigation to prove it. He sent divers down. He brought up the shells of the busted mustard gas bombs, showed that they were American, showed that it was mustard gas, and then he wrote this report. But it had to be classified immediately because of the military secrecy. But in the report, he made an astounding finding, and that was the effect that mustard gas had on the human body.
And that's kind of the crux of the book. I know we have limited time, but basically the man was named, Cornelius Dusty Rhodes, right? He was the physician that kind of discovered this, the effect of this chemical in the body had some benefits to what we use today as chemotherapy, right?
That's right. They discovered that mustard gas essentially depletes white blood cell count and ravages bone marrow. And so this young doctor, Alexander, realized that this was a breakthrough for cancer. He told his boss, Colonel Rhodes, and Colonel Rhodes was head of Memorial Hospital, the biggest cancer hospital in the world, that he immediately organized a huge effort to turn mustard gas, nitrous mustard, into the first medicine for cancer, which is known today as chemotherapy. Yeah. So it came out of this terrible World War II tragedy, but because of this young American Army doctor, it turned into a medical triumph as well.
And the way you do it in the book, Jennet, is great. You just kind of almost step by step and almost feel like you're there. So you really recount the story. We just touched on it, but what a great story to kind of delve into. And again, the name of the book is called The Great Secret, the classified World War II disaster that launched the war on cancer. Again, something good coming out of something tragic. So I guess in the long run, it paid off. But sad that so many people had to die. Huh?
It is, but it's very inspiring for this moment because it's a race for a cure. And right. It just shows that at any moment, unexpectedly, doctors can stumble on a cure and turn the corner in medical history. So I think it's a very inspiring story for this moment as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Do you have a website today you want to give out? People get more information about the book?
I do. You can on JennetConant.com, and of course it's on Amazon and in your local bookstores.
Great. We'll also put a link on our website. But Jennet, pleasure talking to you. Great book, and hopefully we can do it again. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.